The wallpaper in the Confederate White House was a thick crimson silk. It was designed to stifle sound and elevate importance. Mary Bowser, dusting the very seams of that room, knew better. She knew that silence was the language of power, and that history was written not just by the men in the room, but by the servants who overheard every treacherous whisper. Part 1. The Archive of Silence. Richmond, Virginia, 1863. Chapter 1. The President's Pantry. The summer heat of Richmond settled over the city like a shroud, heavy and humid, smelling of coal smoke, unwashed linen, and the faint metallic tang of coming war. But inside the grand executive mansion of the Confederacy, known locally as the Brockenbrough House, the temperature was marginally tolerable, cooled by thick walls and the relentless fanning of the staff. Mary stepped lightly across the polished pine floor of the pantry, the starched white apron rustling with every movement. Her movements were economical, practiced, the perfect rhythm of a woman who had mastered the art of being unseen. She was 20 years old in the eyes of the staff, but her mind held the experience of several lifetimes, honed by a decade of impossible study. Her official role was simple, a domestic servant on loan to the household of President Jefferson Davis. Her true role was catastrophically dangerous, a spy. Mary had been born into slavery, but a remarkable twist of fate, or perhaps divine intervention, as her old mistress would whisper, had seen her emancipated, sent north to be educated, and then, at the outbreak of the war, recruited for the most critical intelligence operation of the Union Army. She was a plant, a living archive of information placed directly under the roof of the enemy's most powerful man. Today, the scent of fresh-baked bread mingled with the expensive aroma of Cuban tobacco, a sure sign that the President, Jefferson Davis, was hosting his cabinet. The men were cloistered in the crimson parlor, the door closed, but sound, like water, found every crack. Mary leaned close to the wall, pretending to check the stock of crystal goblets. She had trained herself not just to hear words, but to read sound, the cadence of authority, the clatter of a nervous man shifting in his seat, the subtle scratch of a pen. That scratch was everything. The defenses at Vicksburg are impenetrable, stated the firm, slow voice of Secretary of War James Seddon. Pemberton has enough powder and men to hold fast for a year. Grant will break before Vicksburg does. A collective murmur of agreement. The room was breathing easy. Vicksburg, Mississippi, the fortress city on the Mississippi River, was the Confederacy's linchpin. If it fell, the Union would control the entire river, splitting the Confederacy in two and guaranteeing their slow, agonizing strangulation. Then came the voice of President Davis, sharp and nasal, cutting through the heavy air. Gentlemen, the morale of the Army of Northern Virginia is paramount. Lee requires reinforcement. We must divert the cannon shipment from the Mobile docks immediately. The Union vessels are slow. The transport should be swift. Cannon shipment, Mobile docks, reinforcement for Lee. Mary silently filed the data away. These were not rumors. They were orders. The detail that truly electrified her, though, was the scratching pen. She knew Davis's habits. When he was writing something critical, something he didn't want his own secretaries to transcribe, he did it himself. The dispatch for General Lee must be coded immediately. It will detail the repositioning of the artillery brigade from Savannah to Fredericksburg. Use the Sun cipher, but simplify the keyword to... A cough long and wet, muffled the crucial word. Mary clenched her jaw, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had missed the key word. A footstep approached the pantry door. Mary instantly moved, seizing a dust rag and attacking an already gleaming silver tray. She lowered her head, the image of absolute servitude. The door opened. It was Mrs. Verena Davis, the president's wife, a woman known for her sharp intellect and sharper temper. Verena paused, her eyes dark and penetrating, sweeping over Mary. "Mary," she said, her voice a low command, "you will serve the wine now, and mind you, no noise. The fate of the Republic is being decided." "Yes, ma'am," Mary replied, her voice a soft, low note of deference. As she entered the crimson parlor, gliding with a tray of wine, she wasn't looking at the faces of the generals or the cabinet members. She was looking at the desk. President Davis's desk was a massive, intimidating piece of oak, strewn with maps and dispatches. And there, sitting next to a half-empty glass of port, was a slip of official Confederate paper. He had been so immersed in the discussion, so certain of the invisibility of his staff, that he had merely placed his hand over the note he was writing. Mary approached the table, moving with a deliberate slowness that stretched time. She poured the Secretary of the Navy's wine, then the Postmaster General's. Finally, she reached the President. As she leaned in to pour, she subtly nudged the wine bottle. A single dark drop of port spilled, not onto the paper, but onto the edge of the mahogany desktop, just under the slip of paper. "My apologies, Mr. President," Mary whispered, her face a mask of shame. "Be more careful, girl," Davis muttered, not looking up. He instinctively lifted the slip of paper to avoid the errant droplet of wine. It was a window of less than 3 seconds, but Mary didn't need a photograph. Her brain, trained by years of rigorous secretive education, was a perfect camera. The scrawled text, the unique cipher pattern, and the key word he was using for the day's most sensitive information, Dixie, were burned into her mind. She curtsied, retreated, and left the room, the scent of gunpowder and betrayal already forming in her imagination. The fate of Vicksburg and perhaps the Confederacy itself now rested on her ability to safely deliver one single word to the Union underground. The archive of silence had just yielded its first explosive entry. The historical narrative structure, to exceed 50,000 words. Title, The Unseen Architect, a true story of espionage and emancipation. Core historical focus, the true and verified life and espionage of Mary Bowser, the black Union spy in the Confederate White House, intertwined with the broader, astonishing story of the Richmond Underground spy ring. Target audience appeal, USA. This narrative subverts the typical Civil War narrative, centering an American hero who was a woman, black, and enslaved, using intellect and courage to directly influence the war's outcome. It offers deep, informative dives into antebellum education, how Mary received her secret education, defying laws that forbade literacy for enslaved people. The spy network, the sophisticated, often brutal mechanics of the Union's intelligence operation inside the Confederate capital, run by Elizabeth Van Lew. Domestic life of power, an intimate, informative look inside the Confederate White House, detailing Jefferson Davis's personality, the political infighting, and the casual brutality of the slaveholding elite. Information warfare, how specific pieces of intelligence, troop movements, supply routes, cipher keys, directly led to Union victories like Vicksburg and vital skirmishes around Richmond. detailed section breakdown, mapping the 50,000-plus word journey. Part 1. The Education of Mary, approximately 12,000 words. Birth and Ownership. Mary's life as a slave on the Van Loo plantation in Richmond. The paradox of the liberal mistress, Elizabeth Van Loo, who hated slavery but was forced to own people. The Secret Mission. Elizabeth Van Loo's decision to free Mary and send her north, Philadelphia, for education, disguised as a relative. Informative sections on illegal black schools and the abolitionist network. The War Beckons. Mary's return to Richmond in 1861, just as the Civil War begins. The establishment of the Richmond Underground, a network of black and white Union loyalists. The infiltration, the audacious plan to place Mary in the Confederate White House under a new, carefully crafted identity, a slow-witted former slave needing work. Part 2. The Crimson Chamber, approximately 18,000 words. Daily life under Davis, detailed chapters on Mary's routine, her observations of Verena and Jefferson Davis, and the crucial political figures who enter the mansion, Robert E. Lee, generals, cabinet members. Cracking the cipher, the ongoing tension of obtaining, memorizing, and transmitting the sensitive documents, troop deployments, financial reports, cotton sales, the challenges of the Confederate Sun and Moon ciphers, the Vicksburg crisis, the high-stakes mission to steal or decipher the specific intelligence that led to the Vicksburg clue in Chapter 1, the dangerous courier system used to get the information out of Richmond into Union hands, the weight of witness, deep psychological exploration of Mary's inner life, maintaining the facade of illiteracy, the emotional toll of hearing treasonous plans, and the constant fear of discovery. Part 3. The Architect's Hand, approximately 15,000 words. Direct impact. Chapters focusing on specific verified intelligence Mary provided that directly shifted the war's momentum around the capital, particularly concerning supply lines and prisoner camp locations. Rising paranoia. As Union forces begin to predict Confederate movements with uncanny accuracy, President Davis grows suspicious. The search for the mole inside the mansion intensifies, placing Mary in extreme danger. The Great Fire Plot. The astonishing decision by Mary and the Richmond Underground to sabotage the Confederate capital just as the war neared the end. The plot to burn critical documents and infrastructure to prevent them from falling into the wrong hands. Part 4. The Erasure and Legacy, approximately 5,000 words. The Escape. Mary's daring flight from Richmond as the city falls and burns in April 1865. The Silence of History. The reason Mary Bowser's name was largely erased from history, the Union's official records were destroyed to protect the living agents, and her life as a former slave made her a difficult figure for white historians to champion. The Unveiling. Her brief, documented post-war life, including her efforts to start schools for formerly enslaved people, before she disappears from the historical record, leaving behind a legacy of immense courage and unseen, world-changing work.
Chapter 2. The Art of Illiteracy. The wine glasses had been cleared and washed. The crystal returned to its designated shelf. Mary stood in the washroom, the sleeves of her thin cotton dress rolled up, her hands perpetually immersed in hot, soapy water. The rhythm of her work was a shield, dulling her presence so that she might hear more clearly the words ricocheting off the walls. She was the personification of the mammy stereotype the South relied on: docile, uneducated, slow-moving, and eternally focused on domestic duties. This stereotype was her greatest asset. In the eyes of the Davises and their esteemed guests, A black woman with her hands in dishwater could not possibly possess a mind sharp enough to commit the details of a major artillery transfer to memory. She was not just playing a role. She was wearing a disguise that was centuries old, woven from the fabric of Southern arrogance. Her memory, however, was a finely tuned instrument. Years ago, in the safe, forbidden sanctuary of a Philadelphia classroom, her abolitionist teachers had drilled her in eidetic memory techniques. She could glance at a page of text and recall it later, flawlessly, as if it were still resting on her retina. This skill, which would have been a prized academic gift in the North, was a matter of life and death in Richmond. Tonight, the keyword Dixie and the full deployment details for the Savannah artillery were locked behind her eyes. Her immediate problem was communication.
Vicksburg is safe for now, but Lee is getting the cannons from the Mobile docks, and today's cipher key is Dixie. The message was curt, coded, and devastatingly accurate. She carefully rolled the paper, inserted it into the wooden button, and stitched the button onto the inside seam of a heavy tablecloth designated for the mending pile. The exchange. A moment later, a rough knock sounded at the service door. It was William. Mary quickly gathered the mending pile, deliberately including the tablecloth with the button. She opened the door, her eyes fixed on the ground. "Mornin', William," she mumbled, her voice thick and slow, the performance automatic. William, his face a road map of age and feigned indifference, took the pile without a word. As his rough fingers brushed against the tablecloth, he subtly located the weight of the wooden button. In one smooth, practiced motion, he transferred the button to a hidden pocket in his own ragged coat and replaced it with an identical, empty bone button that had been resting in his palm. The exchange took less than a single breath. "You have a blessed evening," Mary said, closing the door firmly. The moment the door was locked, Mary felt the tension leave her shoulders. Not all of it, but enough. The intelligence was out. It would now travel across the city, hidden in a wagon full of dirty presidential laundry, before being read, coded in a true Union cipher, and eventually relayed north via telegraph lines tapped near the city limits. The exchange. But the quiet victory was short-lived. That evening, as Mary prepared the evening tea service, she heard a sound she had been trained to dread, the rapid, impatient footsteps of President Davis's personal secretary, Colonel Burton Harrison. Colonel Harrison cornered her near the main staircase. He wasn't overtly hostile, but his manner carried the crushing, polite menace of the Southern elite. "Mary," he said, his voice quiet, "I need a fire built in the private study immediately. The President has papers to burn." Mary curtsied. "Yes, sir." The private study was rarely used, a small dark room near the President's bedroom where Davis stored his most private thoughts. Mary entered and quickly laid the kindling. As she bent over, she saw what Harrison had left on the desk, a stack of paper that had been hastily shredded, not completely, but torn into large, jagged pieces. Harrison returned quickly with a flickering lantern. "Burn it all, Mary, every single scrap. Do not read a single word. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," she murmured, lighting the kindling. Harrison left, but Mary knew he would be lurking nearby. She had to act. The act of reading was more dangerous than the act of spying. If she was caught even looking at the paper, the punishment would be immediate and brutal. She was pouring a little excess coal oil over the kindling, ready to drop the papers onto the flame, when she saw it. The topmost piece of shredded paper was a corner, perfectly preserved, containing a single handwritten date and a destination. July 3rd, Gettysburg Road. The date was just 4 days away. Gettysburg was in Pennsylvania. The information on Mobile and Vicksburg was critical, but this single note suggested something far, far larger, a massive Confederate offensive north. Mary dropped the rest of the papers onto the flames with a theatrical flourish, watching them curl and blacken. But the two words, July 3rd and Gettysburg, were already etched into her personal archive. She had secured one vital piece of the puzzle on the way out of the city, only to stumble upon a far more terrifying one upon her return. The war was not winding down. It was hurtling toward its horrific peak, and she was trapped in the eye of the storm. She had to get this second piece of intelligence out, and she didn't have another button, nor would William return until the next night. Her life now depended on finding a way to send a warning to the Union that General Robert E. Lee was moving north toward a final, decisive confrontation. The cost of this knowledge, Mary knew, might very well be her life, but the cost of silence would be the entire Union.